The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep, open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shane, and today I am back for you guys after taking a week hiatus. I had some technical stuff going on, and I also had some personal stuff going on, so I just needed a week away from the show, away from social media, all that kind of stuff to kind of get my head right a little bit. But coming back into the show, got a lot of new ideas that I want to work on for you guys, and I, with that time off, kind of figured out how to utilize my time and try to do exactly what I'm trying to do over here. So I got a lot of awesome stuff lined up for you guys. I've had a couple episodes on the back burner, of course, that I need to go through and edit, but taking that week off and the technical issues and all that, I didn't get a chance to get to them. So I'm going to be working on them for you guys, and there's going to be a lot of awesome new shows coming up. Same for Bizarre Encounters, had some technical issues over there too, but that show is not going anywhere, and we are going to be coming at it again very strong, very, very soon. But as far as today goes for you guys, we're going to be coming back easy with some cryptid and folklore conversation, some of my favorite stuff to have on the show. But just a couple of quick things before we get into the show. The next live Bizarre Inquiries that'll be on the Open Minds Media YouTube is going to be on March 6th, and that'll probably happen around 7:15 p.m. Eastern Central Time. But of course, as we get a bit closer to that date, we will give you guys some more information on the show and through social media, of course. And I mentioned it on the last couple episodes, but I recently cleaned up the merch store a little bit. So if you guys are in the market for some awesome gear for this show, or any of your favorite topics and or creatures or conspiracies or anything like that, you guys can pop over there and check that out, of course. And one last thing, if anyone would like to be a guest on the show, or if anyone has had an encounter or experience they would like to share on the show, or possibly even have me investigate, you guys can get a hold of me through email, which is inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys get a hold of me through the hotline. You guys can call or text that, whatever is easier, and that number is 313-364-1551. And every single thing that I mention or will mention throughout the show is all available in the link tree, which is available down in that show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, paranormal investigator and author, Bigg. How's it going today, man?
All right, how are you?
Not doing too bad. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. We got connected actually through Diego. He had you as a guest on his show. He's a good friend of the show also, and he ends up passing over a lot of awesome people, so I'm glad that he ended up connecting us.
Yeah, hopefully I'm one of the awesome ones.
Hey, everybody that I get from Diego usually turns out pretty awesome, so.
Yeah, he's pretty cool, so I trust him.
He's a good dude. I was going to say, he only passed me the people that he thinks I'm going to have a good interaction with, too. So, there must have been something, last time you guys were on the show that he was like, no, I got to pass this guy over to Shane. But I guess to kind of start everything off, for anybody that may not be familiar with who you are, what you do exactly, why don't you let them know a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you do, and how you got into it.
Sure, I'm a paranormal investigator. I've been doing paranormal investigation my whole life. I was always a weird kid and just kind of fell into it just from the time I was born. Starting around 2020 or so, I decided to actually write a book on it. I had always wanted to write a book on local paranormal stories, pass along the local folklore and things. So had nothing to do during the shutdown and figured I'd write some material. That one book turned into 3 just because I kept writing and writing. There's just so much there, so many stories. And so right now I have 2 books out and the third one coming later this year. The book series is called Strange Stories from the Skulking Stream. It's about the paranormal and folklore tales of the Schuylkill River area of eastern Pennsylvania.
So I guess a good spot to start, because I want to get into your paranormal investigating, but I'm a big fan of trying to encapsulate local folklore stories to try to keep them alive. So if you have some of them that you almost feel like are dying out, or you got some ones that you just really, really enjoy, I'd love to hear some of your local folklore stories you've written about.
Yeah, there's tons. Like I said, one book turned into 3, and I think I might be writing more along the way. The first, I kind of structured it with starting from more nature and less paranormal, less bizarre and weird type of stuff. And then as the series goes, and within each book, as the chapters go, getting a little bit weirder and a little bit weirder. So I start off with some cryptozoology. The first book is on cryptozoology. The second book has more of a focus on witchcraft and magic use. And then the third book is going to be mostly on ghost stories and hauntings. The first book, one of the earlier stories that I write about, is one that I had an encounter with jackalope.
Oh, 2 birds, 1 stone. You get an encounter story and you get a little bit of local folklore.
Yeah. So jackalopes are, horned rabbits. They're basically a rabbit with a certain virus that they grow keratinized skin and turns into a horn. And I just happened to see one a couple miles away from my house here. So a little bit of one of the weirder cryptozoology type of things, but also one of the more simple, more mundane, less paranormal type of stories.
It's definitely one of those ones that's, I don't want to say not believable, but it's one of those ones that's like the Black Panther stories. Like it's literally just right outside of something that already exists. So it's a little bit easier for people to swallow that maybe aren't into cryptozoology. And I definitely get into the weird stuff, but like jackalopes are one of those ones that you can almost bet that there probably is some of them that exist out there, even if it may just be a deformation in normal rabbits. Like there's something to it,
Yeah, just kind of dipping your toes into it, and then we kind of just dive in. After that, I get into the giant snake stories. The local Native Americans had their creation myth actually revolves around a giant black horned serpent, and we have had sightings around here and along the Schuylkill River. There were several sightings throughout history of giant black snakes. Up into the 20th century, even, where we had people a bit southeast of where I am in the Berks County area, Montgomery County area, hunting them with shotguns. There was a story from Minersville area, which is probably about 20 minutes from my house, where some guys saw a giant black snake with yellow horns that formed sort of a crown, and they called it the king snake. And this thing supposedly had like an army of rattlesnakes that it was controlling through these sort of vibrations or like a hissing that it made. And that's the cover of the first book is a picture of that snake. But I try to link all of the stories back to the Native American stories or the folklore, and I try to connect the personal accounts with the folklore and the archetypes of the stories that they sort of spring out of. From there, I get into the black cat things like you talked about. In Native American lore, the Mashipishu is a spirit that is associated with the giant snake. The primordial serpent spirit is something that's an archetype along all different world mythologies. And the giant snake is usually at war with the weather gods. So that's something that you see all throughout world mythology. The thunder god always strikes down the giant snake. And that's also true in Native American mythology. And in Native American mythology, the black snake is at war with the thunderbird. The black snake, also one of its other forms or one of its associates, is the giant black cat with a long black tail. And we have tons and tons of stories of black cats all throughout history. All from, I think, the first settling of the region, there were stories of strange screaming coming from the woods, and then people would see shadows all the way through the 20th century, where it was kind of a repeating pattern where every 20, 30 years or so, this giant black cat would be seen. It would come through the towns and run off with people's chickens or farm animals. And every couple of years, people would go into the woods and try to hunt the thing, try to get rid of it because it was terrorizing the town, basically. So I kind of link that story back to the Native American stories of the Mashipishu, the water serpent. These things were always seen near the river. Sometimes they were seen crossing the river, or they would attack on one side of the river on one night, and then the next night they'd be on the other side of the river. So it's kind of unusual that you have a large cat that would be traveling along the waterways, but it does match up with the local lore.
Say, at least for the black cats too. I mean, a lot of people have sightings of these things, and I always try to kind of theorize that the reason why they don't like register them as something that's being there is for pretty much like you said with that story, that they end up taking out a lot of people's livestock. So rather than dealing with it being an endangered species where it's on a list and it's protected, people just don't say anything about it. And if it comes into their yard, then they just shoot at it and call it a day. And it's not some like grand conspiracy. It's rather just like, if these things come on the farmer's property, they don't want it to be protected, so they just don't want to deal with it. And talking about the giant snakes too, I've kind of dived into that a lot from like the Cherokee perspective, like the Uktena and everything. And just out of curiosity, when you collected some of these stories, did you get like a size of how big these things are? Because I know there's still some reportings in like South America. They're just usually not reported with like the antlers. They're just giant snakes. But just like, did you pick up like the size of these things were?
Yeah, normally I think there was one that was seen near here. It's a local waterway called the Tumbling Run Valley, where it's actually one of those weird places where a lot of strange things happen. That valley, it's not very much populated, but it keeps reappearing in the series just because even though there's not many people there, so many things happen that people see it. But that snake, I think he said, was about 30 feet. There was a story, I think a few decades after that, where there was one along the Schuylkill River, and that one was about 12 feet, but it was described as a smaller thing. That one was a little bit green, so I kind of assumed that might have been a younger one. There was some neighbors from that encounter that said that they had seen a larger one. The measurements had gotten mixed up in the newspaper reporting at the time. They mixed up the I assume that they mixed up the circumference with the radius, because the way that they described it, it would have been completely unrealistic if it was the radius. But they said it had a radius of 2 feet or something, but I think that might have been the circumference.
Looked like a big tuna can.
It would have been eating cows or something. Yeah. There was one, the king snake that I mentioned. I think that one was really ridiculously long. That one was somewhere around 50 feet or so. I think they had said that they tried to catch that one with boulder trap, where they had it like, the usual like boulder held up with a stick, put some I think they put a chicken underneath it to try to bait it, and it actually just pushed the boulder away out of its way. It didn't crush it or anything. Rolled the boulder out of the way and kept going. They actually ended up following that one into a local mine and it was kind of like this weird modern version of a dragon hunt where they went into the mine after the thing. It was pretty crazy.
See, I'm kind of curious how many stories kind of got mixed, because like even like dinosaur wasn't really in the vernacular until like the early 1900s. So it's like how many different things from the past that we're calling dragons, you know, we look at that as it's some kind of like mythical thing, but I mean, it could have been a general term used for giant reptiles. So it could have included like giant snakes, could have included dinosaurs, because there's even a whole conspiracy with that, you know, if we didn't discover these things till the early 1900s, why are there all these like old pictures of people like riding dinosaurs and riding these giant lizards and everything? And it gets weirder now too, because now it's like we're starting to realize that a lot of these dinosaurs had feathers, and then you start digging into this old folklore and they all describe these giant dragon things having like feathers and everything. So it's like, it's weird. The closer that we're getting, the more we're starting to realize that there's a good chance that dinosaurs, as we know, are around with like ancient people.
Yeah. And modern people.
Hold on tight, everyone. Inquiries of Our Reality will be right back after this brief commercial break. But if you don't mind taking a second to follow Inquiries of Our Reality on Instagram and Facebook, and Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok, I'd greatly appreciate it. And feel free to spark up a conversation. I love getting to know you guys. And now back to the show. Even I've had a few people that have come on and kind of theorized about the giant snakes coming from South America. They're usually talking about like the ones that are a little bit bigger. So like, you know, the ones that you're talking about that are like 30, 50 feet. And they've kind of wondered if there might be like migration patterns, because they stay seemingly near waterways. And they've pointed out that, you know, there are snakes that can swim pretty damn good in the water. They do this thing where they ripple across the top. So if these things are, you know, migrating north for whatever reason and then coming back down to South America, I mean, that could be why there's some brush of sightings that people start seeing them in like the lower United States and stuff, maybe a little bit north, but for the most part, most of them seem to be in South America. But if these snakes are that big, I mean, they'd be able to move through these waterways pretty easy, even going upstream.
Yeah, and that's something that you see in a lot of the stories, that they're witnessed in the water or along the riverbanks. A lot of them are seen as they're crossing the river or across a pond. And like I said, with the black cats, which is, I think, might be why they were associated with each other, that they're both seen in the water or hunting around the water.
And I mean, even kind of getting into some more native folklore, they're talking about like the water panther too. I know from like Michigan, we have some of the old depictions of it up by Lake Superior and everything. But I mean, there seems to be like, you know, there's the land one, and then there is even this combination of one that goes into being a protector of like copper and everything, at least from like the Michigan folklore perspective. But it's like this water panther that also controls the weather. And it seems like with a lot of this Native American folklore, like thunderbirds, uktena, the panthers and everything, they're all these like weather controlling beings, and they seem to have either one, I mean, look, depending on which way you want to look at it, it seems like it may have been just like their explanation on why different weird weather patterns would happen. Maybe it was one of those things where like, you know, somebody saw one of these things, then right after a thunderstorm came, so they just kind of started associating the two with the other because it was something strange they didn't see very often. But I always find it fascinating with native folklore that it's like, some stuff you have to take literally, but other stuff you have to take more as like a symbol for something rather than it actually being exactly how they describe it. But it's kind of hard to dissect it because with a lot of the native stuff, you don't get enough of it. They keep it very close to the chest because it's oral tradition. Like what we're aware of, I'm sure, is only like 10% of the creatures they used to talk about.
Yeah, and like I said, with the local waterway, the Tumbling Run Valley, there's like a weird, like the stories almost kind of come true in a way, because you have I think 1911 was the giant snake sighting. Then 1920s, there was a black cat sighting, which was told in the second book that because that was linked with some witchcraft type stories. So you have the giant snake, you have the giant black cat, and then not long after that, there was a giant flood that flooded the region. It actually wiped out all of the railroads all the way down through Berks and all the way down to Philadelphia, actually, which is something, like you said, they say that they control the weather, or that they're at war with the Thunderbirds, which control the weather. And there's some really strange parallels or metaphors in there where You have I'm from the coal region, so we're talking about the area where the railways were in control of the waterways around here. There was the Schuylkill Canal, so you have water that's being controlled by these business conglomerates that are controlling the coal production. They were taken over by the railways once the railways started. Railway, if you look at the symbology of that, you have like basically a giant snake that's weaving its way through the landscape, and they bought the waterway because that was the control mechanism for the Schuylkill River Canal. And then after they took over, you have this flood. It's like a 1-to-1 ratio of these historic events and the Native American legends of the giant snake taking over control of the world's water and then being washed away by a flood. It's a little bit eerie how close they history kind of repeats the legend.
See, that almost makes you wonder if they had their original legend and then they just kind of started altering little pieces of it, considering it was an oral tradition, to kind of fit two things at once. So it kind of makes you wonder like where the exact like root may have came from, because a lot of like what we know about it now may have been because of the railroads. And it makes you wonder if it like everything actually goes back a little bit farther than that, or if that may have been the start of where like the folklore kind of started to split into its own variation.
I kind of look at it as as any, not just Native American, but any mythology is kind of telling the story of the pattern of history or the way things happen, and that mythology. There's a quote in the book. I forget who it's by, a native ancient philosopher from Greece, I think, talking about how myth is something that's not necessarily true, but it's always true because it's just one of those stories that resonates throughout history and through like it tells a deeper truth, and those truths kind of come out as history goes on.
I never really thought about it that way, but that is pretty true, because it's one of those things too that as time goes on, it may not fit something for a while, but once it starts to fit something, then it becomes part of that, and it just kind of continues on from there. It's whatever group of people at any specific time, it actually like reaches and speaks to them, which is why you see even just like ancient philosophy kind of come back in waves depending on, you know, the time and the era and everything like that. Everything's bound to repeat because it's going to resonate with somebody at any specific time.
Yeah.
And you also kind of mentioned that some of the stuff kind of connected in with some of the witchcraft stuff. And considering that all the three of your books, you kind of have a different category for them, I'd love to kind of dive into each of them a little bit and kind of get weirder as we go on.
Yeah, I always say that each of the books has a focus, but each of them also has a bit of every one of these categories in it. So like the book on cryptozoology, it's volume 1 is called The Hidden Zoo. It's on cryptozoology, but it has stories of witchcraft and magic. It has some magic and haunting type things in it. So like one of the stories in the first book is the Wolfman's the Wolfman's grave. It's a local legend from a little bit north of here in Northumberland County. And that story probably took place, if it took place, like I said, it's one of these myths that might be beyond truth. Probably took place around the 1700s. There was a young girl who was tending to flocks of sheep. And at that time in history, there were problems with wolves. Pennsylvania had put a reward out for wolf pelts. They were kind of trying to kill off the wolves at the time because they were a pest. They were considered a pest. But this girl, Emma, I believe her name was, never had a problem with the wolves. And one day she realized it was because this elder man was watching over her flocks with her. he would come and sit with her. He was sort of the local weirdo, the quiet hermit that lived in the woods. The locals didn't really like him hanging out with her, and they told her not to mess with them, not to talk with him. But he would come and sit with her, and it was rumored that he was a witch. One night, one of the local farmers heard a commotion in his barn. He went outside and saw a wolf attacking his flock. He shot at the wolf. He knew it was late at night, so he didn't follow the wolf into the woods. He figured he would track it down first thing in the morning. So when the morning came, he went out to the woods, followed the blood trail, and came to the hermit's cabin. He opened the door and saw that the hermit had been shot where he shot the wolf. So the locals gathered together, buried him basically in the floor of his own little wooden shack, called it the Wolfman's Grave, and it became a local landmark. After he was killed, the girl reported that the man would still come and visit her. She said that he still comes to protect me and my flock as he did when he was alive. So right there in that story, you have a wolf man, which is cryptozoology. You have magic use to turn into a wolf. And then you have ghost haunting, which is literally a ghost of a werewolf. So that's one of my favorite stories because it covers all three of the categories.
Have there been any confirmations on that one? Like, if the site's a landmark, has anybody ever checked to see if there is like any skeleton remains or anything in the area?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that some local historians have retold the story. It's one of those that kind of has fallen by the wayside. Nobody really tells the story anymore. I kind of doubt that it happened. Most of the sources for it go back to the early 1900s, late 1800s, and I think it was probably a local folklorist who made the story up. But then there's also weird hints of things that might have been true in it. So and that's something that you find a lot with paranormal stuff. I'm sure you're aware that there's kind of a half truth or truthiness to a lot of the stories where it's sort of like maddeningly close to reality that you
See, I feel like that one almost could be like an attempt at like mob justice. They just try to cover it up with a local folklore story to like justify it or something. Like, maybe he was making people uncomfortable hanging out with their kids and something like that. So they just took care of the problem, and just for anybody passing through, he was a werewolf, and then nobody questioned it. So, there may be a body with a shot through it, but it doesn't mean the guy necessarily ever turned into a werewolf. It just could have been, retelling of a story that was trying to part of like the town's dark past. They were trying to cover up almost with folklore.
Yeah, I get into that in the book a bit when I tell the stories in the books. I tell the sort of a background of it. I tell the story, and then I sort of try to analyze it and look into the history. So in my research for it, I found some people that might have been the original people. I couldn't find the guy, but they never told his name anyway. But I do explore that possibility that you discussed. One of the things that's weird about the story, though, is in all of the tellings of it, he's never portrayed as negative or bad. He's not a bad guy in the story. He's always portrayed as just a quiet, awkward guy that just kind of sits next to her. They never say that he touched her. They never say that they were in love or anything like that. There was always specifically mentioned that he was a friend, that he just sat next to her and watched the flock, which is something that you wouldn't really see if they're trying to portray him as a villain. If you're trying to villainize somebody, you would say, and especially if you're going as far as to say that he's a werewolf, you might as well say, yeah, he attacked people or something like that.
Could have stole livestock or something like that too.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that seems like
protecting her livestock. Yeah. So they really went out of their way to portray him as a nice guy if they were trying to cover up the dark story up. But maybe that's part of the cover up too. Make him seem like a nice guy, but it's just a really weird way to do it if they were trying to cover up some misdoings on his part.
I mean, even on the other side too. I guess if he was a hermit, he wouldn't have had like a family or anything like that. So, I mean, the only other thing I can maybe think of is maybe he could have been like somebody that stole somebody's livestock to feed himself, and then they took care of the guy and then realized like, oh, this guy was just doing this to feed himself. So they kind of just tried to make him sound like a bad guy, even though they accidentally did some mob justice on him. Like maybe they did that and then did something and then realized that whatever he did, he didn't actually do, or it wasn't to the extent that they thought it was. So then they just tried to cover up his end a little bit too and make it. He wasn't a bad guy. We just had to deal with him because this happened. Hold that thought. We'll be back in a flash. But if you don't like hearing the ads, then I have a solution for you. You can get ad-free and early access to this show and Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $1 a month. That's less than a bag of chips, and it's a great way to support the show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in merch store discounts, live access to episodes, or premium video versions of episodes, then there are a few other tiers with additional benefits with 7-day free trials available. And we are back, so let's hop right in. But, I mean, if you got some more stories as far as like the witchcraft stuff, I mean, I definitely love diving into this stuff because I definitely think it's a little bit more like we're kind of talking about symbolic of something rather than it being exactly as said. But, I mean, there could be some possibilities to it, man. I mean, who knows what is or could have been possible if you have a knowledge of what you're doing with this type of stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed in the research, I knew that there were several stories of witchcraft involving transformations or black cat stories, so to speak. But when I started doing the research, there were really a lot of local stories where witches turn into cats, or what I found was that in eastern Pennsylvania, we have it's mostly German folklore that our magic history is kind of based off. Something about that genre of witchcraft or magic use, they use animals as a form of magic. So the spells themselves sort of take the form of animals to do their work. So I'll give you an example of that. In the 1700s, in Pinedale, which is about 5 minutes from my house here, it's a small town just east of Oregsburg, Pennsylvania. 1700s, first settling of the area. We're in the Appalachian Mountains, so at this time, this was kind of like the frontier land. At that point in history, people were settled in Philadelphia through Berks County. Once you get to the Appalachian Mountains, that was kind of it. Beyond that was just wild lands. So it was just very small towns, little settlements here and there. There was a local teacher. His name was Leno. They said that he came from Germany. So he was a German immigrant. Nobody really knew him. When he moved to the area, everybody noticed that he was really sort of standoffish, quiet, kept to himself. He always seemed like he was haunted by something. He seemed like he was always bothered by something a little bit worse than what most people were dealing with at the time. He eventually admitted that the reason he was always quiet and always a little bit jumpy was everywhere that he went, he saw a small black dog, and the dog would talk to him. He said that night and day, this little black dog would follow him around and tell him to kill himself. Eventually, he did hang himself from a tree, and they buried him nearby. They actually had to have several farmers put together a little plot of land because they couldn't bury him in the cemetery because it's hallowed ground. He was a suicide, so they couldn't bury him there. Nobody wanted to bury him on their land because they didn't want the curse to transfer to them. So they all put together a plot of land based off of little pieces of each of their plots and buried him there. Nobody knows where that is. So somewhere there's a hidden one-man graveyard of a cursed man. So the theory at the time was that he might have been involved with some kind of assassination or something in Germany, and that he was cursed with this black dog to follow him around to seek vengeance. So that's an example of how the spells themselves kind of take the form of an animal. Another example, there was a traveling salesman, same town, same area. Nobody knew this guy's name. Traveling salesman in that time, nobody really knew who they were. They traveled from town to town selling things. They didn't have Amazon back then, so they just had to travel around with a giant bag on their back, selling anything that they could. So this guy, they found him dead. There was a local witch doctor. Everybody kind of thought that the witch doctor had killed him. After the salesman died, they started to see his ghost near this tree where they found his body. They actually buried him under the tree. Along with his ghost, they would also sometimes see the ghost, or the apparition, I should say, of another man chasing him with an axe. And his grave always remained uncovered. The grass never regrew there. Even when it would snow, the snow wouldn't cover the grave. Eventually, the local witch doctor, who everybody blamed for it, was one day he was at the store, the local watering hole. Everybody was gathered there, and he came in just out of nowhere and sort of had a veiled confession where he just went up to everybody and said, "I heard of a story of a guy who was killed with an axe, and the guy who killed him chased him around and around a tree with an axe before he killed him. And the man said to the man with the axe, 'You'll pay for what you did. If in no other way, the chickens will dig the truth out of the ground.'" So they took that to mean that might have been why the grave was always uncovered, because the chickens, or maybe some spectral chickens, were continually uncovering the ground to try to uncover the truth of the murder.
I was gonna say, at that point, if it was the witch doctor, like, that kind of takes anything away from him, because that would have put like a direct like finger right on him. So if he was going around and saying these like cryptic stories, I almost feel like that kind of partially takes it away from him. Or it's also intentional as a diversion so that people don't think of him because he's the one going around telling the story.
Well, he killed himself soon after he made that confession. Part of the I'm sorry, I'm telling the story all backwards, but part of the curse that the guy supposedly put on him was, at the end of it, he said, "You will hang for it." And he did hang himself. So I should have led with that, but so he did confess. He admitted to it and then killed himself, basically. They did rebury the salesman in the graveyard then, and after they reburied him, his new grave was covered with grass. So the curse, or the spell, did its work, and then after that it went away.
I was going to, have you had a chance to go and check that out? I know you mentioned that you do paranormal investigating. Have you like checked out any of these like cemeteries that, you know, this guy's at or anything in the area?
There is a local cemetery. I know that it's actually the church that I used to go to as a kid, there are a couple of graves. It's a really old graveyard. And in the old section of the cemetery, there's a couple of graves that are unmarked. But I know that there's also a whole lot of missing graves from that era because it was so early in the history of the area that a lot of the graves didn't stay there. But there are at least 2 graves in that cemetery that don't have a marking. So, or they have a stone, like a field stone without a name or anything. So one or both of them could be him and or Leno or who knows who else.
Well, I guess this will kind of be 2 birds, 1 stone, because I also wanted to dive into some of the local ghost stories with you, but I guess it'll probably go hand in hand with some of your paranormal investigations, because, you know, a lot of the time, you know, you'll kind of look up the history and do some paranormal investigations. So wherever you might want to start with it, if you want to start with maybe what got you into doing paranormal investigations, because I'm sure it was probably another experience, like you mentioned the Jackalope one earlier, and then maybe we can touch some of the local ghost stories along with places you've investigated.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I was always a weird kid. When my mom saw the Sixth Sense, she got really creeped out because she said it was basically like watching me as a kid. Because I was the kid that would always talk about people coming to visit, and then they'd ring the doorbell or talk about dead family members. So my first paranormal investigation per se, I was 4 years old. I talked to my parents about my grandfather who had passed away. And one night my grandmother asked me to get in touch with him because she wanted to ask him some questions. And we had kind of a little seance in our kitchen. So I kind of tell people my first paranormal investigation was when I was 4 years old.
Get him started young,
that's how
eh?
I got into it. It just kind of, I wouldn't say there was one thing that really got me into it. It was just kind of always how I am. When I was 5 or 6 years old, we were going on vacation to Virginia, I think, and I had found some story in like a kid's magazine at the time of this ghost, and I convinced my parents to stop by the place where it supposedly took place so we could try to see the ghost. So I was just from the time that I was little, I wasn't interested in sports or anything like that. I was trying to find ghosts.
You and me both.
Awesome.
So, at least for like your paranormal investigations, what are some of the places that you've been to, checked out, or some of your personal favorite investigations?
I've done most of them have been like I've done Gettysburg. If you're from Pennsylvania and you do paranormal investigation, you go to Gettysburg.
That's on the list. You got to do it.
Yeah, you have to. One of the stories of Gettysburg is there's a famous picture of a sniper. What happened was after the Battle of Gettysburg, this photographer went around the battlefield to take pictures. So there are some pictures from historical books and things like that where it looks like it's battle pictures, but it's actually this guy had gone around the battlefield and posed people's bodies in such a way that it looked like it was action shots. So there's this famous picture of a sniper from Gettysburg. And the story is that this sniper was one of the dead bodies that this guy had posed. And then the story goes that the sniper doesn't want his picture to be taken. He was offended by this, so he breaks people's cameras. So I took the usual ghost tour, heard all the stories and everything, and then my friends and I went out to the battlefield, and we were taking pictures. We got a bunch of cool orb pictures. We got some weird mists and things like that. I was taking a picture at this one spot, and my camera completely shut down. I tried to turn my camera back on. It wouldn't turn on. It was completely dead. It was fully charged at the time, but it just died. My girlfriend at the time said, "Hey, idiot, look at this." And I go over, and there's the plaque with that picture, explaining this is where that picture was taken. I'm like, oh, I'm in the exact spot they told me not to take the picture. And he broke my camera just like they said he would. I took the picture. I sent the camera away to get repaired. They sent it right back and said there's nothing wrong with it. No charge. It turned on right away when we tried it, and it was fine after that. So he apparently just shut it down for me just long enough that I would get out of the battlefield and stop trying to take his picture.
Drained all the energy out of the camera. That's something you hear about all the time, especially with Gettysburg. People will go there and try to take pictures and say that their camera dies in like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and that's something that you see a lot with paranormal investigations. I did a paranormal investigation. Excuse me. I did a paranormal investigation of mine near here, the number 9 mine. It's a local museum now, but that was the worst one I've ever been at as far as stuff not working. I took 4 cameras, several voice recorders. Everything was fully charged. Almost nothing turned on the entire time that I was there. So I only got about an hour of video. I got 2 hours or so of audio, but besides that, nothing worked. Even the stuff that I did record would then not transfer to my computer. The files were corrupted.
Yep.
I looked into it. It was a weird corruption situation too, where I can sometimes fix the stuff, but the thing was completely corrupted beyond repair. So a lot of that stuff, a lot of that footage, even though I did get a little bit more than I thought I did, I still didn't get it.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back with that deep conversation you crave. But just a quick reminder, if you'd like to snag some gear for this show, Bizarre Encounters, or your favorite creature or topic, hop on over to the Open Minds Media merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly. Welcome back to the show. Now let's dive right in. Did you end up actually like seeing or experiencing anything like firsthand that you tried to get a shot of, but you just ended up getting it?
At the mine there, you mean?
Yeah. Did you end up like seeing anything, or was it mainly like you just ended up catching stuff in the pictures? Because I know a lot of the time, people will go in an investigation, not actually like see anything, but then they'll go back through the pictures, and that's when you start catching all like the dark orbs. You start seeing all these shadows and everything. But like at that one, did you end up seeing anything yourself?
I didn't get anything on picture with that one. I think only one of my cameras ended up even working, and nothing came up in the pictures, but I got some really good audio. One of the things that was really interesting was I had, what I try to do is I set up several different recording devices in an area so that I can try to have the pieces of evidence corroborate each other. So I had an audio recorder and a camera, and I recorded a voice. It was a female voice saying, "Turn to me," I think it said. And it's interesting because in the one audio recorder that was a little bit farther away from where I was standing, you can hear the same exact words being said. And then on the camera, the video camera that I was using, the video didn't turn out, but the audio did. And you can hear the voice louder as if it was closer to me. So that was pretty interesting. Like I can kind of sort of triangulate where she was standing if it was a person there.
Did you have you gotten a chance to like see anything that was just like undeniable, like with your own eyes?
I've seen some really weird stuff. Nothing that I would say is undeniable. When I was a kid, I would see weird things that I would say were undeniable. Most of those I don't remember anymore. Like I said, I used to just basically talk with dead family members, like they would come and visit me.
Kids have a different connection too, because it seems like, people have these experiences when they're younger, and then when you get older, because you had those experiences when you were a kid, you like continue chasing the phenomenon, but it doesn't interact with you the same way. Because people have a million different theories on why it is that kids seem to be more of an antenna for this type of stuff. But it seems like anytime you're a kid, that's when everybody seems to have like their main, like I saw a full apparition. And then as they got older, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's something with like your eyes. Maybe it is just a connection where it's like a closer to the grave, beginning of life type of thing. Cause obviously when people start to get a little bit elderly, they start having these experiences and everything like that again. But, depending on like what your belief system is, I kind of wonder if it's like you're closer to the creation / end. So you start seeing a blend between both,
Yeah, and I think your brain, when you're a kid, the connections in your brain haven't finished forming, and then when you're older, those connections start to break down. So I think a lot of what we consider to be reality or how we perceive reality is more of a filter. So your brain as your brain makes more connections, it's building up filters rather than building up a better model of reality. So it's kind of doing the opposite of what we tend to think it's doing. We're experiencing mundane reality more efficiently, but not the deeper spiritual reality.
No, that definitely makes sense to me too, because it seems like as a kid, you grow up, you start seeing things, your parents tell you, oh, it's just imaginary friend, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. So then your brain starts not even doing it on its own, because I feel like there's a lot of people that just never really build up that filter, but just the other things that people are putting in your head start creating those filters. And then when you start getting older, those filters start breaking back down again. And that's exactly why like the floodgates are almost open. And then right when somebody's like, on their deathbed almost, that's when like they're full on seeing like groups of people walk into the room that nobody else can see. And that's when it's like, it's a question of, are these people actually going senile, or is it that there really is something to it? But I definitely tend to be more on the side that there's something to it, because people have the same experiences with near-death experience. Like there's something connected with that these things are actually there. It's not just something people are making up in their head.
Yep. So one thing that I did see, I did a paranormal investigation in York, Pennsylvania. Before we did the investigation, the gentleman, so most of the investigation that I've done were private homes. It was people that were seeking help. So they would come to us basically as a last resort before they would sell their house. A lot of the people that we dealt with the paranormal group I was with, they would basically be on the verge of selling their house. We were the last resort. So this guy sent us a picture that he had taken in his upstairs bathroom. It was from the hallway. It was taking a picture of his daughter that he was talking with in the hallway. Behind her is the bathroom. And between whoever's taking the picture and her was this big shadow figure. I'm talking like 6 foot something, huge muscles, black shadow, just standing there like squared up, like he's ready to fight whoever's holding the camera. So that's what we knew going into the place that we were going to be dealing with. It was a really weird, haunting situation. There was all kinds of weird situations going on with that. Like, I think that the guy was kind of being controlled by it to an extent. The more that we would find in the house and the closer we got to figuring out what was going on, the more pushback he would give us and like not want us to come back for another investigation. We did end up going back there twice, I think.
That seems to be a big thing with people that investigate like poltergeist, because I've had a few people come on and talk about particularly poltergeist, that as you start kind of getting closer to figuring it out, there's always somebody in the family that's being influenced by it that starts trying to, somebody that'll full on be like, come in my house, investigate this. Then all of a sudden they'll be like, no, we don't need this anymore. We're done. You can just leave now. Yeah. We're done.
Yeah.
Like total flip flop.
Yeah, exactly. So after that investigation, after we had finally given up the case, we always do like a closing ceremony type of thing, protective stuff, do a prayer, stand in a circle, do a prayer, do a protection charm, whatever. This one was just one of those cases that just wasn't enough. One of my colleagues on the team had shadow figures in his house. He said that he was in his upstairs apartment. Something came up the stairs and sounded like it was going to bust through the door. While that was happening, this was ongoing for months. So while that was happening at my house, every night I would have this big shadow figure standing in my closet looking over at me. So every time I would wake up during the night, I would roll over and see this big ass dude standing there, completely shadow, blacker than black, just staring at me. And something about shadow figures in your room, like, I don't know what it, like, if it was a person, there's no way I'd be falling back asleep, but something about ghosts, I'd turn over and I'm like, leave me the hell alone and go back to sleep.
It's like the ostrich thing. You bury your head and it's like, you can't see me, I can't see you.
But yeah, that went on for several months. And then several years later, too, after I had moved to a different house even, there were times when I would wake up and it would be standing over me. I never felt particularly threatened. It was more of an annoyance. Like, I think he was trying to intimidate me. It's the only reason I can think that it would be doing that. But like you had said about how older people tend to see things, I used to work with elder people. I did elder care for several years. One of the clients that I worked with was an elderly lady. She had dementia. One day, just out of nowhere, she said, "The big black bird took my life away." And I started talking to her about what she meant by that. She said that one day somebody knocked on her door, and when she went to answer it, it was a big black bird, and it took her life away. It took away who she was. And I sort of took that as I'm a psychology major, so I kind of took that as her personification of her own dementia, that this bird figure was somehow a personification of her losing her identity or her memory. Then several years after that, when I was seeing shadow figures, I was doing some spiritual work at the time, and I was seeing shadow figures in my closet again. A couple of times they had dragged me out of my bed even. But one of the figures that I saw was like a bird type figure. It was like a humanoid, but with a bird head. And I thought that was weird. I hadn't thought of this lady or that story in several years. And then the next day after I woke up and was thinking back about it, I thought, holy crap, that was a black bird. I'm glad it didn't take my life or anything like she had said. But it's just weird that there's a figure there. There's something to that.
Say it's either a couple different ways to view it. I mean, maybe there is something to it where after she brought it up with you, it was something that almost kind of started watching you, which kind of gets to my like weird next point with shadow people. I feel like it's one of those things that almost everybody I talk to has had a shadow person experience, but I don't like it gets talked about on shows, but I don't feel like there's that much research being done on it. Like there's a couple handful of people that do it, but it's not being talked about as much, I feel, as like Sasquatch or any of these other experiences, even though it's, again, seems to be one of those ones that almost everybody has. And especially when you start diving into like all of this type of stuff, which again kind of brings me to the point I was trying to make. It almost kind of makes you wonder if there might be something that's almost like monitoring people and seeing what they're doing. And maybe that's why everybody has these experiences, is because at certain points in your life, you're doing something where whatever these things are, they feel like they have the need to monitor you. And coming from at least this lady's perspective, maybe there is different variations of these things. And if you're getting too close to something, they can just wipe your mind. And there's a lot of people that kind of do this weird research into a lot of like mental illnesses being connected a little bit more into something more spiritual. And that's why it's one of those things that's still like really, really hard to prove. A lot of it was science. A lot of it's just like theories more so than anything. Is maybe there is a spiritual factor to it. Because I mean, if you're talking about the brain itself, I mean, that would be the place where the spiritual connections would be made. So, you know, maybe there are more people that have reported these like black bird things, and maybe they happen to come into dementia after, and maybe that's why a lot of these stories don't get talked about. But I'm almost kind of curious if there might be a little bit of a rabbit trail to follow as far as people with dementia seeing these black bird shadow people or bringing these up at any point.
Yeah, it's something I would like to get into more.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And we are back to the show. So let's hop right in.
It's funny you mentioned that, because it's actually something I bring up in the series several times. In the second book, the one on magic, that gets into like the witchcraft thing. One of the big themes in witchcraft and in the witch trials, especially, what they considered one of the forms of attack was appearing, quote unquote, appearing in spectral form. What that meant to them at the time was they would see people at their bedside at night, which is kind of like what we're talking about. And that gets into the sleep paralysis demon themes, the Hat Man type of thing. So I get into that. I get into the brainwave patterns that lead to that state of experience. In the third book, then I go back and look at more closely the Hat Man stuff. I talk about the I think that Hat Man is a psychopomp, or like what you would call a guardian spirit, or not guardian of the threshold. So it's like a threshold spirit. I think that the hat is a mark of office for spirits that control the barrier between the mundane and spiritual world. That's something that you see in ancient myths. So the god Hermes, he's always pictured with a wide-brimmed hat. He was a psychopomp. In his role as a psychopomp, he was always pictured wearing black clothing. In Vietnamese folklore, there was a figure that was always pictured with a wide-brimmed hat and black clothing that would bring souls to hell. In Wales and Northern Europe, there was the Anku, which was also often pictured as a wide-brimmed hat man with black clothing. Today we have the Men in Black, who control information between mundane reality and whatever is going on with the phenomenon. So it's something that I get into a lot in the second and third books, between the brainwave states, the barrier between the mundane and spiritual world, and these shadow figures and how they all kind of play together.
See, it makes you kind of wonder two things. If it's a matter of the phenomenon kind of shifting depending on culture, or just people in general, because assumably, you know, if we are changing our fashion, our dress, like what we do through the ages, you know, whatever's on the spiritual realm might be doing somewhat of the same thing where the form changes over time. And if you're kind of looking at it from that theory, that kind of explains some of the like physicality with like the Hat Man that a lot of people have mentioned, like actually feeling this thing like grab them or like touch them, versus like a lot of the other shadow people you kind of just see as like marks on the wall. You see like the wisps, like the crawlers, like the ones that kind of just take off. But it seems like Hat Man's always the one that physically has contact with people. So if it is this barrier between the spiritual and the physical realm, that would completely make sense.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely something to it. I would like to get into more of that weird black bird thing. I'd like to try to find out more. like you say, I think that is a rabbit hole that it's difficult to gather information on that kind of thing if you don't have like a psychological or university funding for a questionnaire or some kind of study,
I almost kind of wonder if that kind of maybe ties in with like Odin's birds, for example, because I'm trying to look up what they represented exactly, but I think one represented like wisdom and the other one represented knowledge or something like that. So if that's the case, if there is this whole symbology that kind of maybe even connects into Odin's ravens, maybe they could be the one that takes that away, and that could explain the whole dementia thing. Like it's something that maybe goes back a bit further.
Yeah, I could see that.
I'm checking out right now, see if I can bring up what they're supposed to represent. Let's see here. Yep, knowledge, memory, and the eternal quest for wisdom. So looking that up with the word memory in it, that ties even closer in.
I got chills.
I think there's something to this, man. You got to start looking into the ravens and blackbirds in general. And maybe these things, once they've kind of connected more with the spiritual realm, maybe again, like the phenomenon changes. So these things have taken on more of like still kind of carrying on a part of like their old aspect, but still kind of maybe taking on this more like humanoid form because it's easier way for them to be able to manipulate their environment around them. Because I've kind of thrown theories on this that I kind of feel like as things change through time, that eventually everything within that process will reach this humanoid form. And I don't think it's anything particular to us necessarily, but even if you look at other things off in space, like if you get into like extraterrestrials, all the theories with that, I think it's inevitable that to interact with your physical environment, you'll get to a point where you're a humanoid shape. And then once you get to a point where you start interacting past the physical environment, that's when you start getting into all these other, almost like energy form type beings and everything. And I mean, even in Star Trek, they talk about like energy forms and that being like the advanced past the physical form. But yeah, I think eventually everything is inevitably going to become like a humanoid form to interact with the physical.
Yeah, I think it's like a universal interface, I would say. Like it's just the most efficient way to interface with the physical world. You have, the head, two eyes facing forward. You have two grippy hands. You got something to stand on. It's just an efficient form.
Exactly. That's always been kind of my theory on it, because it seems like everything eventually, well, for the most part, kind of starts off with four legs. And whether you go into the aquatic stuff, I mean, you talk about whales, that they were these little rodents that eventually went into the water and became whales. They still started off with that four legs, two flippers, two back fins, and then it kind of transitioned from there. So if something is standing up, eventually it is going to eventually turn upright, and then those four legs, the other two are going to eventually turn into hands to interact the environment. So even looking at it from that perspective, like it just seems like it's inevitable unless it's something that's aquatic. But even stuff that's aquatic, you start getting into the weird stuff with that, and there are sightings of these humanoid type aquatic creatures. So maybe it's also a matter of once you get to a certain intelligence level also, then you start kind of taking on these characteristics.
Yeah, I think it's just a more efficient form.
Exactly. Stay tuned, guys. This is our last break. But if you enjoyed the show and think I deserve it, please leave a review or rating for the show on iTunes, Spotify, or any other podcatcher you use. Your continued support is what makes this show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. So thank you. Now feel free to skip past these ads so we can get back to the show. Now back with that deep conversation you crave. And I know that you said you weren't feeling too great today, so we weren't going to take too long for the show, but hopefully we can come back at some point for a round two, because I love diving into this kind of stuff with you, and I like that you kind of look at stuff from the psychology standpoint of stuff, because it's always nice to kind of have like a new mixture of philosophy kind of mixed into this stuff. But I always like to end the show with words of wisdom. So if there was any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners today, what might it be?
What I always like to say when I'm doing my paranormal talks, I say that people ask me why I'm not afraid going into these haunted locations, and I say that I feel like if you're going to go into a dark place, you need to bring a light. If you're going to spend a lot of time in dark places, you should be the light.
Ain't that the truth? Because I definitely think it's a matter of you have to be open-minded, but you don't want to be scared because also you'll become like a target. You don't want to not believe because then these things won't show themselves to you, or you'll look past things that may be a sign. It's that bounce back and forth between you can't be too far in any camp. Like you got to be a skeptic, but you also got to be open-minded, and you can't be scared, but you still have to give them a reason to want to interact with you other than just berating you and traumatizing you.
The most important piece of equipment I always tell people on any investigation is your own mind.
Ain't that the truth? I was going to say, you can't always trust the electronics, but at the end of the day, you get a couple different eyes on something, then, you might actually have something, even if the cameras didn't work.
Yeah, use your own discernment, use your own best judgment.
And weirdly enough, man, the paranormal seems to be one of those things that, at least for the normal researcher, like you have these experiences that you undeniably are like, yes, there is something to it yourself, but it's so hard to prove this type of stuff to other people that aren't within the experience because, maybe with a lot more funding, I'm sure that there is a lot of stuff going on because it seems like the government's been diving into paranormal, spiritual type stuff for a very long time, but that technology that they might be using to actually make somewhat of a solid gauge for this stuff, like the average researcher doesn't have a means of making contact with. You got an EVP and stuff like that, but an EVP, one person, that's some solid good evidence. On the other person, they're like, oh, there may have been a computer or some kind of electrical thing or whatever. Like it's so hard to just have one specific thing that you can gauge something paranormal and say, look, here's a reading that proves that this is paranormal, other than like the experience itself.
Mm-hmm.
But if anybody wanted to come and check out your books, if anybody wanted to check out some of your investigation work, or I don't know if you still do investigations, but if anybody, maybe needed a little bit of help with something that's going on in their own lives, how might people be able to find your books, find you on the internet, and get in contact with you?
Yeah, I don't have a paranormal team per se right now, but I do offer investigations. I can investigate myself. I can put a team together. Or what I've done a couple of times is just work directly with the people. But all of my stuff, the books, the paranormal investigations, anything like that, you can reach on my website, richardbigg.com. That's Richard and then Bigg, B-I-G-G. So richardbigg with 2 G's.com. That's where you find everything.
And of course, I will include that link down in the show notes. Everybody can find it quick and easy. And I appreciate you making the time to come on today. Really glad that Diego connected us, and I'm looking forward to hopefully doing a round 2 with you at some point.
Same here. Look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to show some love, smash that follow icon and share today's episode with a friend. Grassroots support from listeners like you is exactly how this show grows, so thank you. And if anyone would like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can do so through email, which is inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the two that I am the most active on. And you can also get a hold of me through the submission form, which is available on the link tree, of course, or you guys can also text or call into the hotline. That number is 313-364-1551, and that, of course, is available down in the show notes to make it quick and easy. And if you have some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends of the show, IKNOWSQUATCH, Snarly Out Natural Products, Cryptoteeology, and Big Ape Threads, and our friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available. More information on those also is, of course, available down in the show description. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which, of course, is also available down in that show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with the mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.